Safeguard our flank. Chapter 6, Part 7. The North Midlanders. General Rawlinson believed that the only way he would be able to make sure his orders were being carried out was by incessant hard training, by the participants doing everything strictly by rote. He planned for his big push to operate like clockwork, relying on detailed planning and continual practice, two operations that were going to win him the battle, especially now when he was dealing with territorial soldiers who might not be up to it. The British effort was going to be preceded by a 5-day bombardment designed to meet maximum destructiveness. An hour before the advance, smoke shells were to be fired, and the German front line receive its final onslaught from the massed guns. From then on, the artillery were going to lay down a creeping barrage 100 yards ahead of the first leading wave to keep the Germans' heads down. Further waves of riflemen were going to give support, clear the taken trenches, and bring up supplies. The infantry would advance in regularly spaced waves 100 yards apart, 5 yards between each man. Each company to follow one after the other, with their captains and lieutenants following their men. They were to occupy the Germans' trenches, clear them, and keep moving forward. All this movement was to be done according to a strict timetable, so that the leading waves of troops could take full advantage of the softening up barrage. Support waves would consolidate and prepare for the next advance. This was not going to be like the child's game of "What's the time, Mr. Wolfe?" for there could be no stopping, having to keep up with the sequence shelling. If the leading wave got too far forward, their own guns would fire on them. If too far back, the Germans would be up, out of their dugouts, firing at them. Major General Wortley's 46th North Midland Division included the 137th North and South Staffords and the 139th Sherwood Foresters. They would lead the attack on the north side, supported by the 138th Lincolnshires and Leicestershires. The 139th Brigade, the Sherwood Foresters, that May, held the divisional front line at the village of Foncquevillers, burying new telephone cable lines, stacking ammunition, constructing gun pits and setting up observation posts, all in preparation for the coming battle. Directly to their front, the enemy lines were held by the 3rd Battalion of the 91st Reserve Regiment, part of the 2nd Guard Reserve Division, all part of Stein's 14th Reserve Corps. The 9th and 12th Companies of the 3rd Battalion were the Sherwood's immediate enemy, commanded by Lieutenant de Reserve Metzer and Lieutenant de Reserve Overich. The 46th Division's front line ran half a mile north of Hebuterne, then 800 yards up to the left flank of the Sherwood Foresters. The village of Foncquevillers was directly opposite Gomcourt Wood. Here, no man's land was about 400 yards wide, holding the ruins of the sucrery, a disused sugar beet factory then in ruins. These ruins were 20 yards from the D6 Maiden Road. Northwards, towards Monchy, was in German hands. The village of Foncquevillers held the centre of the 46th Division's position, directly opposite Gomcourt, its park and wood. Further north was the German gun position in Pigeon Wood, not far from the little salient of trenches called the Little Z, stationed on the British Division's left flank. This part of the German line, which created a small salient, was called the Schwalben nest, holding a Maxim machine gun, able to enfilade the whole of the German line to the east. The previous winter, the occupying British troops came to the conclusion that they were too weak to hold all the line, so they selected certain parts for fortifying, wiring them into strong points, then filling in the remainder with loose wire, which became in time weighed down by the weight of the collapsing sides of the trench. The village of Foncquevillers was in a better state of preservation compared to Hebuterne, its neighbouring village. It was recognisable as a one-time place of habitation, having most of its buildings still standing. The brick church was still there, even if the clock had stopped at 11:45. Its crypt, housing the battalion ammunition store, and the mill's cellar, the company office. The village boasted a YMCA, where food could be bought to supplement the boring army rations. It could even be described as a good billet. The brick cottages with their boundary walls giving shelter to their kitchen gardens containing vines and apple orchards. Beyond the patch of grass outside the orchard, the ground dipped down to no man's land, where work was in progress every night digging a new forward trench. A move guaranteed to give a 100-yard start to the attacking Midlanders all along the sector. This was in keeping with the work being carried out by the 56th Division on their front. The 137th and the 139th Brigades moved forward into trenches opposite Gomcourt Park on the 4th of June. In unison, the 138th, the Lincolnshires and Leicestershires moved back, keeping a supporting role. The thick woodland to their front had been interwoven by dense belts of barbed wire, and further belts added in front of every German trench. The British field guns and mortars had great difficulty in cutting gaps. The German guns took the opportunity, whilst the British guns were silent, to register their guns on the communication trenches, then stopping before the British guns could range on. The British artillery batteries behind Foncquevillers began registering their guns on the 24th of June, and were allotted 400 rounds per gun to cut through the wire and take out the German gun pits. This allotment of rounds was increased to 700 rounds per day. Work on the gun pits had been suspended by the incessant rain, delaying the sighting of many of the guns. As no delay could be contemplated, the guns were set up in uncompleted pits. It was opportune that the German artillery was not too active as this was going on. The activity on the British rear was frantic as new rail tracks were laid, metalled roads, store houses, ammunition and bomb dumps created close to the front. Compounds were built for prisoners and wounded. General Snow's plan had the Sherwood Foresters, the 7th Battalion, attacking as the first wave, with the 5th on their right. The 6th Battalion would bring up the rear in support of the 2 Battalion attack, and the 8th held in reserve to bring forward stores and ammunition. 5 minutes before the attack opened, the smoke parties would discharge their smoke bombs and candles. The 139th Brigade would attack with 5 waves, made up of A, B and C companies, having the little Z on their left. The 4th would bring up the rear and convert the German front-line trench by reversing the firing steps, and the 5th would hump stores and ammunition. Meanwhile, A Company were to kick off the battle from the newly dug trench in no man's land. The 2 other B and C companies formed up in the old trench, and D, the 4th Company, would occupy the retrenchment line with the 5th in Green Street. There would have been about 200 men in each wave. Gomcourt Park, most of the village and the chateau were not to be attacked by the foresters, for they were not to stop but were to keep going, to meet up with the 56th coming from the other side of the park. An order of the day requested attacking battalions to keep back from all future attacks one company from each battalion to act as a reserve and corps for the future retraining programme in times when the bulk of the battalion had been lost. The brigade's targets were the German trenches to the front, given the identifying names of Food and Fork, between the Little Z on their right and the communication trench Orinoco, making for Pigeon Wood. To the left would be the Little Z, the Schwalben Lest, a salient sticking out from the line on the side of the main road leading from the North Foreland. This salient, step in the line, was always a danger if not eliminated by the main bombardment, for it would allow the Germans to enfilade the attacking forces by having a clear line of fire on the Sherwood's left flank. As it turned out, no special attention was given to this by the planners, which was to be a terrible mistake. A company practically lost all their men immediately, as soon as they emerged from their trench. A number of B and C made it to the German front line, A allowing 12 men to carry on to the German second line B. A number of attempts were made to rally the men, but exhaustion caused by the previous day's march back to lines, atrocious weather conditions, flooded trenches and unbroken wire defeated them. Their spirits were not to be raised.